In this tutorial, we're going to start building out our home page. I have our example that's already built out pulled up on my screen here. And we're going to take this section by section, so we're not going to build out the whole thing in one go. We're going to tackle the first one, which is this top part, the graphic and the essay, personal legend, or whatever we have for this year planned for you will go right up in here, up in this area. I want to quickly switch over to our developer view, and let's make sure we take a look at what this looks like in our developer window. So you'll notice that in the laptop view, our screen really gets maximized. Our image gets maximized from edge to edge of the screen. And if you flip over to the mobile view, Galaxy, you'll notice that the image here shrinks down to fit that size of that screen. So that's one of the things that we're going to style as part of our tutorial is in this tutorial. And we'll use this little feature many times throughout our site. So let's get started. I'm going to tab over to Dreamweaver, and the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and delete out all of these paragraph fillers that we used earlier on for spacing. And I'm going to start with building some of these div containers out. And I will go ahead and apply some of these classes, although we haven't created these classes yet in our style sheet. So like our header and footer tag that we did previously, there is also a main tag in HTML5. So we're going to start with main, and we're going to do a main class of main. And the other thing that, because I'm going to come back to this actually. So we're going to start off with main class main, and then I'm going to close that out. Now we will have to come back to this tag in a little bit to add something to make sure that our design, the content area, starts below the main part of our header. Because if you remember right, we created a sticky header, and so what will happen is if we don't say position our main section below that, it'll go underneath it. But we're going to come back to that here in just a minute. So I'm going to hit the enter return key with my cursor there in the middle, and we're going to nest inside of main. We're going to nest another div, so that way we can center our design when we get to a certain screen width. So we're going to go div class, and then this one is going to be row. And we're going to use this class quite a bit as well in our design. I want you to think about how we're setting up our layout. Our layout will be like a grid, and that's why we're using CSS Grid. And so it makes it a lot easier if you start thinking about your design in quadrants and rows. So if you think about a table like you have in Excel or you have in Microsoft Word, when you create a table in Microsoft Word, you have columns and you have rows. And so every time you go down a level, you create a row. And so it's just like get used to doing this pretty much in this layout, because every time we want to go down a level, we will create a row. And then every time we want to go over, we create a column. So we're just basically targeting essentially cells in our design. Okay, so I'm going to hit the enter return key there. And then we're going to nest another div tag within that one as well. And technically we don't have to, for this section, we don't actually need the div class row for this, because we've set it up so that the div that we're going to create now could stand alone without being nested inside of a row. But we're just going to stick to kind of like our standard practice, like keeping it consistent throughout all of our pages. So that way we're generating a good habit when we're putting in our content. So we're going to go div class, and I know that doesn't make sense now, but it will eventually. So div class image, and then -cnt for container. Okay, I'm abbreviating container so we don't have to type that out every time. So hit the right caret there, okay, and then hit the enter return key. And then we are going to type in the left caret, and then this is where we're going to insert our image. So I'm going to go img src, and then get the code hint to pop up, and then hit my enter return key, and then look for my images. And this one is going to be my responsive web design graphic right there. Hopefully you'll have a graphic that you can put in there at the top. If not, you can use this one for now, and go ahead and hit open, and then space, and type in alt equals, and I'm going to make this what the title of the image is, so responsive web design, and then / right caret. So that's all we need to do for the image part of things. And so next I need to put in an area for the personal legend or whatever we're going to have you write for this year of the portfolio. So what I want to do is I want to locate the closing div tag of this row right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on that and find out, see where that's at. So I just like to look at that to make sure that I'm not accidentally nesting a div inside of a div that I don't want to. So I'm going to place my cursor at the end of that closing div and hit the enter return key. And then we're going to add another row. So we're going to add div class row again. So you see how this is working? In our first row, we had our image, and in our second row, we have our text. So I'm going to hit the enter return key, and we're going to have a heading 2 in here, and we're going to call this the personal legend of, or whatever title, catchy title that you came up with for this. This is just a great way to introduce yourself to whoever is going to your site. And then from here, I'm going to put in some paragraphs. I don't have this actually an actual essay about me written up. So what I'm going to do is put in some filler text, or what is known as lorem ipsum dolor. And so I'm going to start with a paragraph, and essentially I'm going to put in 3 paragraphs. You might have 4, you might have 5, depending on what you end up with. So what I would recommend is putting those amount of paragraph tags in for the number of paragraphs for this essay. And you guys just see that my wife is going to Target, thanks to the little message that popped up on my screen. Okay, so I'm going to tab right over to Chrome because I already have this lorem ipsum site pulled up, and you can generate lorem ipsum text. And the cool thing about this text is that it replicates writing in terms of character length and spacing and all of that kind of stuff, but it means absolutely nothing. It is total gibberish. So I'm going to copy that first paragraph. And so this would mimic like if you already have this written. So you would take your first paragraph, find the middle of your opening and closing paragraph tag there, and then hit Command V or Control V. And so I'm just going to go through, and I'm only going to put 3 paragraphs in there. I know I put 5 in there, so I'm going to delete that extra one out. And then I'm going to come back over, and then I'm just going to grab 2 more paragraphs. And paste that in there to that second paragraph tag. And then do the same thing. There we go. Okay. So in terms of the content-wise, that'll do it for our first piece. But we need to style it next, because if we preview this, come over to our preview window, it's gonna, like I said before, remember, like I said before, if we don't make that adjustment, our image or whatever our content is will go underneath the header. That's why you see it partway cut off there. And then our text here is, there's no spacing, it's slammed over here to the left. So we want to make this look nicer and make it display properly. So we're going to tab over to Dreamweaver here and get into our style sheet. So before we do that, we're going to end up putting our style for our main content area in a couple of different places. And you might think this is kind of weird. Why wouldn't we just put it in one place? Well, the first bit of styling that we're going to do is going to deal with our grid layouts. And we'll use these grid layouts, and you potentially could use them in a lot of different areas, not just in your main content area. You might use it in, say, your header. You might use it in your footer. It's just one of those things that is so useful that oftentimes you want to get to it rather quickly. So we're going to put those styles up here below our page styles because we can use these anywhere. And then below our header, below our nav bar styles, we'll start to put in our main styles. So we're going to do some of this up here, and then we'll move down here in just a minute. Okay, so to do that, I want to make sure I'm going to copy and paste where I have header styles, that comment feature out. And that's why we left a space, by the way, up here before, very early on in one of our first tutorials. So I'm going to grab that little comment feature and copy it. And then on a couple of lines above it, so I have some space there, I'm going to hit the Control V or Command V keys, so that pastes it in there. And then, so from header styles, I'm going to name this. This is going to be grid layout styles. Okay. And so then right below our mobile version there, we're going to start our first style. And the first one that we need to do is to create that row that we used in our piece. So I'm going to start out with row and then open up a curly brace. And the width of this is 100% because remember, we're designing for mobile view first. We're not designing for the desktop view. Okay, and then hit the enter return key. And then I'm going to add some padding to the top and bottom of this so that content-wise it'll have some breathing room, and then 0 on left and right on that sides. And then we need to set up our grid. So grid, column, template, and remember we're doing a tube design because we're starting out with mobile first. So we just need our row to span all 12 columns or whatever columns that we've put in our piece. Oops, I'm sorry. Back up. Grid column, not grid column template. So just grid column span 12. Okay. And then the next one that we need to do, if we go back to our source code here, I'm just kind of following along the div classes, the divs that we've created. So I haven't done this one yet, and we're going to come to that one in just a minute. But we did row, and we need to do our image container. So we've done row and image container, and then we'll come back to main right after that. So switch back to my style sheet, and right below row, we are going to call this img cnt for container. Open up a curly brace. So here's what's cool about the way this works. Our container, this is why we nest images within their own containers. It's a really powerful tool. We're going to make this width 100%. So it's going to be the 100% of the window that it's in mobile view. And then margin wise, we want to add some margin on the top and bottom so we have some spacing between elements. And we're going to tell it on the left and right sides, we're going to tell it to be auto. It's a way to center things using auto. And in fact, we are going to make sure that this image container centers no matter what. So we're using all kinds of tricks here for any kind of browser that comes across this little class. We'll be able to center the image that we're displaying. So then next, to add to that, we're going to justify our content to center. We're going to align content to center. And then we're going to text align content to center. So there's no doubt about whether or not that image is going to center or not. Last but not least, we are going to add an overflow. So in case, for whatever reason, our image exceeds the container dimensions, it will hide whatever overflows. So that's kind of the idea. But next we need to address the image itself within the image container. So place your cursor right after the curly brace and then type in image, CNT, then space, and then IMG. So the class is the image container, the IMG-CNT, and the tag is IMG. So we're targeting, what we're doing is read it in reverse. We're targeting the image tag within the class image container. Now here's the beauty about this little gem. We're telling our image that it needs to be 100% the width. Okay? And you look at this. So our image is 100% the width right there. So we're targeting the image itself, right? So I have to show you how this works here. So our image, remember, is inside of this container, right? So I'm going to pop over here real quick to illustrate that in our source code. So here we go. So here's our image container, and our image itself is nested inside of this container. So by default, this element, this image, becomes a child to this parent. Okay, so this is a child level element to this parent container. That's how it's going to work. So what that means is that the properties of this image will inherit the properties of its parent. So this is important because what we're saying here is that we want our image to be 100% the width of this container. Okay, this container will be 100% of the screen that it's in. At this point, it's a mobile screen, so it's going to make the width of it at 100% of that mobile screen. Now, if we try to look at this in a big desktop view, it's going to stretch it out and make it really look really awful, because the desktop view will be a lot larger. When we target the desktop view, the desktop media query, we will change that so that it'll limit the size of the image to a max width. And so what that'll do is that'll give us the appearance of the image adjusting sizes to the screen, when in reality it's just making sure that it's 100% of whatever container it's in. So it's a pretty cool deal. After the width 100%, we're going to hit the enter return key, and we're going to go ahead and put this height of auto in. By default, it'll automatically resize based on the width. That's how sizing works in this scenario, unless you give it a specific height dimension. When you resize a width, it'll automatically resize the height. But we're just going to go ahead and take care of all our bases there and do an auto. So let's go ahead and tab over real quick and see where we're at with our progress. So remember, I told you this image is going to stretch all the way across our desktop view, which in this case is cool. That's what I want. But at a certain point, it's going to pixelate and become too much, and it's going to look ridiculous. So what I want to show you, though, is how this works in the mobile view. So we're going to switch over to mobile view. Remember, we're designing mobile view first, and we need to look at this in mobile view first. So we still have this issue of our image being buried underneath our header. So we need to address that next, and address some of this text. So let's go ahead and pop over to Dreamweaver. Let's get down to where we're going to add some of those styles, and then after we do that, we will come back and address the desktop media query for those two sections. So I'm going to scroll down here, and this is where we're going to split up our styling here. And we're going to move it down, and we're going to find our header, our navbar section. And at the very end of that last media query that we just put in before, that little margin top piece in the last tutorial, we're going to hit enter return. And again, we're going to grab some of this comment out and copy that and then paste it. And then here we're going to change that from footer styles to main styles. Okay. So here's where I'm going to give myself some extra room there, get an extra space. So here's where we're going to adjust for that piece. So what I need to do is add a little bit of additional styling to our main tag, and we need to tell it to position itself 200 pixels below the top of our nav bar, so that way our content flows beneath it. So to do that, I'm going to create a new class called top, and then open up a curly brace, and then from there I'm just going to say margin top 200 pixels. Okay, and next we need to also style the main class for that main tag. So we're going to type in main and then open up our curly brace. And we need to tell it to position relative. Okay. The reason why we need to say position relative is because we need to say we don't want you to be in an absolute position. We need you to be in a certain spot. Okay. We need you to be able to float or move. So we're going to say position relative, and it's relative to the either the previous element or the parent element. So we're going to hit the enter return key, and the width of this container is 100%. And we want to add some padding to this container at the very top, just for a little extra, just in case we end up with something funky. Just so we have a little bit of spacing and not have, our design too tight. So go ahead and hit Command S or Control S. So I'm going to pop back over to our HTML and source code. Before I do that, just remember, we've already created this. Remember, we did this. We haven't put this one in yet. And the reason why this is the reason why I wanted to show you. So we're going to pop over to our source code, and remember, there's our main class main right there, and there's our row. So let's go ahead and go back to our design real quick and hit refresh. And so our design still isn't popping up in there where it needs to be, right? And so that's because I haven't applied that top class again to that div, to that main. And what we're going to do is we're going to add that class to, so we're adding a second class to our main class main. So we do that not by putting our cursor after it and then putting in class again. Can't do that. Okay, we can't do two classes that way. What we have to do is we have to place our cursor right after the first class name, main, hit the space bar, and then type in top. So essentially we're combining two classes in one. Okay, and that's about the limit that we can do this with, what most browsers will support. So we're adding the top class, which positioned the margin top was 200 pixels margin top, so it's going to push it down by 200 pixels, and we're adding it to that main. So now when we go to preview our design, our image will be pushed down because that's in that main class and it's being pushed down by 200 pixels. When we start scrolling, that slight delay there, because there will still be that margin top there, there'll be that slight delay, but most people won't see that. Most people won't, that won't matter too much. Okay, so there we go. So that's pushing our image down below. All right, so next we need to address some of our styling on some of those paragraphs, the paragraphs that we created. So I'm going to toggle back over to our style sheet, and we are still in mobile view. So I need to add styling to that H2 tag and the P tag that we created. So I'm going to hit the enter return key here, and we're going to type in period main H2 curly brace. So just a quick review. The reason why we're doing it with the main, because rather than something else, we will be using pretty much the div class main for all of our content areas. So rather than doing something else, it's just easier to target our elements, our paragraphs, our H2s, all of our headings and stuff like that, and the parent element of our container, because that'll be the most common denominator for all of our content. We could probably do it with the row class that we use quite often throughout, and that's actually probably a better like use of that, just for, like, say we come across something that we may want to change, but our design is simple enough to where we can get away with this. So just be mindful that if you run into a problem where you're wondering why your design is changing or not changing the way you expect it to be, just know that we are targeting these in our main class. So these will, whatever gets affected in our content area, in our main content area, will be applied to those styles. So if you try to target something individually that's nested within that, you might end up with some conflicting styling going on. Okay, so we're going to start with some padding. Here we're just going to do padding all the way around, 5 pixels, and then we're going to text align this heading in the center, and that's about it for that. We could do some other things like font size, other types of decoration, but I'm just going to keep it simple for now, and we'll see if I want to change it here in just a minute. So I'm going to go ahead. Okay, so next we need to target our paragraph tag so that it's a little more readable. So I'm going to after my cursor is after that curly brace on the heading 2 on the main class. So I'm going to hit the enter return key a couple times and type in main paragraph and then open up a curly brace. And from here, we are going to address some margin. So what I want to be able to do is that when we have a new paragraph, we have a clear line break between each paragraph. So I'm going to do that by adding margin to the bottom, not the top, the bottom, because generally speaking, most things will apply margin to the bottom, so that way that's the way things get spaced out rather than to the top. And we're going to do 10 pixels. And then we're going to add some padding. Now remember, we're still in mobile view, and some padding 0, on the top and bottom. But I like to put in just a little bit of padding on the left and right sides, so that way if you're in a mobile view and as you're scrolling through, the text doesn't just jam right up against the edges there. So we're just giving it just a tiny bit of padding so that it spaces itself away from the edges just slightly. And then because we are also in mobile view as well, I really like to set my alignment to justify, because I think it looks a little bit better in the screen. The other thing that I like to do to improve readability on a screen, especially in a mobile screen, is to space the letters out a little bit nicer. So I'm going to target letter spacing, and we're going to do 1 pixel. Okay, and that'll just spread it out just enough, I think, to make it a little bit more readable. Let's double check that real quick before we move on to our next thing. So I'm going to tab over to our design here, and so you can kind of see how that text gets spread out just a little bit more on the screen. We could change the font weight of this, but I think it'll be okay. So I think we'll go ahead and leave it that way for now. Next, I want to go ahead and target how it looks in a desktop view. So I'm going to switch over to laptop high def, okay, and notice that our image is still full screen, and that's okay. Right now, that laptop is about 1440. That's the dimensions. That's the screen dimensions. That's the resolution. So it's about 1440 right there. But I do want to bring in, so notice that 2 pixels on the left and right of the text there just doesn't really cut it like it does in the mobile view. We need a little bit more padding there. So we need to adjust that, and a couple other things. So let's go ahead and jump back over into our style sheet. And the first thing I want to do is come back to those grid layout styles that we did just a little bit earlier. So I'm going to scroll all the way up until I find that. So grid layout styles, we have mobile, and then next we need to make that desktop version. So luckily I already have a comment feature with desktop already set for me. So I'm just going to grab that one below and hit Command C or Control C. And then below where it says image container image in that mobile section, I'm going to place my cursor after that curly brace and hit the enter return key a couple times, and then paste that in there, and then hit my enter return key one more time. So next I need to put in my media query. So at media screen and parentheses, oops, didn't get inside there. There we go. minimum width, 700 pixels, and then open up a curly brace. There we go. Okay, so the first thing I want to address is the row. And what I want to do here is I want to put a limit to the width that row can go to. So right now, this is something we talked about in one of our first tutorials when I introduced you guys to this design. Right now, in our HDMI laptop screen in the developer of Chrome, we see that image full width, and it scales all the way from edge to edge in that screen. And that's because this image, because right now this image is set to 100%. So whatever screen that you see it in, it'll scale to that dimension at 100%. We want to make sure that gets limited at a certain point. We don't want it to just get out of control and be huge and pixelated, if we happen to throw it up on an even bigger screen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set that max width to 1920 pixels. And we've already done this before in another media query with our header. Remember, the reason why we did that is so that the content in our header wouldn't go edge to edge as well, that it would our design would kind of center in the middle and not expand out beyond that value. So we're going to do the same thing with our row. So we're going to go row, period, row, and then open up a curly brace. And then we're going to do max width. And it's red, so it doesn't like something that I've done here. Oh, I know what it is. Hang on, let's go ahead and finish this out. So 1920 pixels, and get rid of this. If you happen to do this, you're following along, and I just involuntarily do this all the time because it's like habit after putting in a value. We don't need that semicolon after the value in that media query up in the top there. So take that out, make sure that it's green, and then make sure that your class is green as well. So max width, 1920 pixels. Hit the enter return key. We are going to set our margin so that way it will automatically center. So the deal is, this is how this works. So in the media query, first off, the media query says, it'll start with, okay, is the screen size a minimum width of 700 pixels? If that's true, then it'll just, make it that big. But then when we get to this style right here, if it hits this limiter, so if it hits this page break at 1920 pixels, this max width, it's going to basically stop it at that width. And then from there, it's going to set the margin so that the margin is auto left and right. Well, it's applying it no matter what. Whatever screen size you're in, it's getting this value. But you're not seeing it because that this row is filling that screen. So if it's 1500 pixels, right, it's still getting that value and it's still making that image that same size. It's just when you hit this limit, when you hit this limiter, the 1920 pixels, that's when you're going to see this really kick in. That's where you're going to see the design start to kind of center itself within the page. So, for instance, I'm going to tab over real quick and then hit refresh here. And so here, we're in this laptop view and it's 1440 pixels wide, right? So I'm going to exit out of here because I'm going to get out of the developer screen and show you that now this screen is bigger than 1440 pixels. It's absolutely has to be at that bigger than 1920 pixels. So that's where this image is getting capped off. So if you're thinking about what size do I need to make my graphic right in here, well, the smallest you should make it is 1920 pixels. The smallest you should make it is 1920 pixels. And the reason for that is because if you make that the smallest, then when it hits that mark, it's going to not pixelate and it's going to look really crisp and clean. Now that also means the largest that you should make it is 920 pixels, because if you make it any larger, it's not going to get any larger than 1920. It's going to stop at that size. So really, that's the image, that's the size image you should have for this section right here, because that'll be the largest it'll ever get if you're on a big screen. And if you go and it shrinks, and if it shrinks to a smaller screen, it'll still shrink, and the image itself will still stay crisp and clean because it's larger, and it'll still look good. So that's kind of what we're after there. All right. So come back here. We're gonna pop back into our developer screen. There we go. Back in laptop view, and then pop back over to Dreamweaver. Okay. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to do the same thing to our image container. And this is just I would call this a fail-safe. So technically right now our row is taking care of this for us. And this is what I meant earlier when in this tutorial when I was talking about how we're nesting our image container within a row. And really we're just kind of doing that mostly out of habit and structure. To keep our structure similar in how we do this. And I mentioned earlier that technically we don't need it. We could get away without it. And the reason why is because we've set this row, this max width to 1920 pixels. But we're going to add this failsafe, and we're going to do the same thing to that image container that we created. And so that image container is going to get the same max width treatment. And so just for just in case, like if for some reason, and we'll go ahead and set the margin to this to 0 and auto as well, but just in case for some reason, if this image doesn't get inside of our row container, at some point we don't want it to grow beyond that 1920 pixels. So this is just kind of it might be like a dead style. It might be like a redundant style to our image container there. But we're just putting it in just in case. Okay. Last but not least, we need to go down to our main style. So we've completed that. We've completed our grid layout styles for this section for now. We'll need to add a couple more later on for a couple of other sections. So now we need to go back to that main style section, and we need to add our media query as well underneath the mobile section. So I need to grab a desktop tag or comment, desktop comment, and I'm going to grab this one up here. This was part of our nav menu again, so I'm going to hit Command C or Control C. And at the end of that last .main paragraph, I'm going to hit the enter return key, and then Control V, and then enter return, and then type in the at symbol, media, screen, and parentheses, min width, 700 pixels. Don't type in semicolon this time like I did last time, and then open up a curly brace. Okay, here we go. In this media query, we are simply going to target the paragraph tag that we put in there, because we want to add additional padding to the left and right of that, and we also want to change up how that paragraph is displayed. So I'm going to type in main, P, and then open up a curly brace, and type in padding, and then 0 for the top and bottom, and we're going to add 5 pixels padding left and right. Now, you have a choice here as to if you want to do additional styling to this paragraph. Remember for the mobile version, we set our text alignment to justify. If you want this to be something else, we can change it to left, like if you want it to go back to normal. So if we go back to preview our design here and scroll down, we have that justify over here on the right hand side. And sometimes when you scroll, that scroll bar gets in the way as well. So you can add some additional padding if you'd like. But I think it's okay if you don't have it in there, or if you just stick with 5 pixels. But some of you may not like the justify look. Right now it looks really nice because we're using some pretty bland text filler, and that may not always be the case in terms of your design. I tend to like justify content, but I know not everyone does. So if you want to change it, you want to do text align left. Okay, and then toggle back over, and then make sure that that change takes place. Okay, So that's pretty much going to round out the first part of our design. Here's where we're going next. I'm going to toggle over to our mock-up. So we've completed that out here. Notice that in my design here, I didn't take out the justify, but that's there. So our next section is going to be our set the bar high and go for it. That's our goal, our SMART goal section. And then, so that'll be our next tutorial. And then we'll finish our homepage out with these kind of highlighted features, these highlighted areas. Now these highlighted areas are just basically bigger buttons that are pages that already exist. So if we click on our nav bar here, basically what we're looking at is current success stories is your showcase. So that's a way that people could see that and be like, oh, I want to check this person out and I want to go there. Internship experience, education plan. So you get the point. And the reason why we do that, I left out resume because I didn't think it was as important down here, and I think the 3-column layout looks better anyway. But the reason why we do that is sometimes your users don't always do what you think they're going to do. We'd like to think that everyone has a certain pattern of how they use and interact with a website, and that's just not the case. Everyone's different, and everyone sees things differently. And how people use the internet and how the people see your website is also subject to that rule. So what we try to do in web design is make sure that we offer ways that make it easy for the user to find what they're looking for. 80% of your users might know how to use a hamburger menu just fine, and you won't have any problems with that. But it's the other 20% that may have never seen that before. And so when they're scrolling through your site, they may not instantly go to that, and that really doesn't jump out to them anyway, right? Like, unless you know to look for it. But what does jump out at you are these highlights right here, and they highlight like a button. So I'm looking at these and I go, ooh, I want to check this out. And I see that I can click it. It's highlighting. It's doing something. That tells me that, oh, I get to do something with that. So I'm just going to take a chance and click it and go to that next page. So that's the idea behind these sections, so that way people can find your stuff. It's like advertising, a little bit of additional marketing, but it's also enhancing the user's experience on your site. So with that, that'll round out the tutorial for the index page. Next up is the goals section.